And welcome. This is News of Interest. This is John Hubel. Today I'm going to talk about two news stories, and then I'm going to get into a book that I had finished up a few months back. It was one that I think I mentioned on a previous show, perhaps the beginning of last month. But over the last 2 weeks or so, there's been a significant amount of news coming out of Egypt about the efforts there to depose the puppet dictator, Hosni Mubarak. And each day there's a new twist in this ongoing soap opera. And I'm seeing what I would consider to be a lot of disinformation on the internet, where there's these articles being written by these analysts and different pundits that are saying that the CIA and that Mossad and other types of intelligence agencies working for Israel and the United States are somehow backing different elements of the protesters to try to hijack the opposition. And I don't know if any of that's true, although it could be. But I think what's important is that you're seeing a lot of momentum being generated by the opposition to push against Mubarak and to push him and his government out of office. And now you have Mohammed el-Baradei. He's become somewhat of a figurehead of this opposition movement. So hopefully they'll have great gains there and are able to eject Mubarak, but we'll have to see. There was an interesting story that I came across, I believe this was yesterday, and it was titled, "Gazans Feed Hungry Egyptian Troops." And for anybody who knows the situation or has read about the situation in the Gaza Strip, it's basically like the world's largest concentration camp. And basically the Israeli government have the Palestinians inside the Gaza Strip on lockdown, and they have it almost, well, I guess the better term is blockaded, because they let very little food and other types of construction materials and consumer goods into this strip, because they're trying to break the control of the Hamas-led government there, which is a whole other story about how Hamas came to power there, which I'm not really going to touch on. Now, what's kind of ironic about this story is that the Gazan merchants, or the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, they're smuggling food from the Gaza Strip under these tunnels that have been built to smuggle food and other items from Egypt into Gaza. Now the tunnels are working in reverse, which is not really what they were designed to do. And there's definitely some irony in that. I'm just going to read a few short sentences from this article from the beginning of it. And it goes, quote, "Underground tunnels which were used to bring basic goods from Egypt into the Gaza Strip are now working in the opposite direction. The Egyptian soldiers who have been isolated on the Gaza border for over 10 days due to the internal upheaval are getting bread, canned food, and other supplies from the impoverished coastal enclave through the tunnels. Gaza's merchants have also been sending vegetables, eggs, and other staples into Egypt, where store owners have run out of stock because normal supplies are cut off by the unrest." So it's definitely noteworthy that this is going on, considering the economic state of the Gazans. They're still altruistic or generous, and they're contributing or sending some of their food to the Egyptian soldiers. Now, the book that I had alluded to earlier in the program is called Hamas, A History from Within. And this book was written by a Palestinian political analyst. I believe he has a doctorate, and his name is Azam Tamimi. I'm probably not pronouncing that right. But this book, I had actually picked it up from my local library, and it's just it's a really great book. It's actually written from a Palestinian perspective as opposed to a Jewish one, as many books on Hamas have been written by Jews, whether they're living in America or they're living in Israel. So you really get the other perspective, the other side of the Palestinian struggle from the perspective of a Palestinian. Now, this book it's approximately 350 pages, and it came out, I think it's been out since the beginning of 2007. And one part of the book that I really wanted to touch on, and what I'm going to do is, this is actually a Google ebook, so you can find it online for free if you actually wanted to print it out, or you could buy it used on Amazon. And I'm going to find that Amazon link too, and I'll have all these links posted in my YouTube info box. But what I wanted to do was take a minute or two, and I wanted to read what I found almost fascinating, is that this goes back to really the early 90s, and when Hamas was founded, it became, or it was kind of an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. And from what I've read in this book, and even in other places from other accounts, Hamas was basically started around 87, 88, and they really didn't come into prominence until the early 90s. And during their beginning, they had, Hamas and their supporters had very limited resources. Many of them didn't have any firearms. So they used whatever they could to resist the Israeli tyranny or Israeli occupation. And in many cases, they used axes or hatchets or machetes, or they used knives. And that's what this next little item is about. There's a section from the book, and I never heard about this before until I read this book, and it's what's known in the Palestinian struggle as the War of the Knives. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the 2 pages, because I had actually printed these out. I don't have the whole book in print form, but I have these pages. So I'm just going to read this and share it with everyone, because I think it's something that people should hear, and of course they should read, and just to reinforce it. So it goes, I'm going to start this here. It says, more than a mere restructuring was required to resuscitate Hamas's military capacity. However, here Israel unwittingly made a major contribution. Conditions were worsening for the Palestinians every day. On the 8th of October 1990, 22 Palestinians were killed and more than 200 were wounded when Israeli troops stormed into Al-Haram al-Sharif, the compound of the Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, firing on Muslim worshippers. The Muslims had gathered inside the Haram to foil a plot by a group of Jewish extremists known as the Temple Mount Faithful to lay what they said was to be the cornerstone of the Third Temple. On the same day, infuriated by the news of the massacre, Abu Sarhan, who was said to be close to Hamas, stabbed 3 Israeli soldiers to death in Jerusalem and wounded a 4th. This was the beginning of what became known as the War of the Knives. The last straw for the Israelis came on December 14, 1990, with a further knife attack on a group of Israelis working in an aluminum factory in Jaffa by 2 Arabs from Gaza who had crossed the Green Line earlier in the day. The attackers, Marwan al-Zaig and Ashraf al-Baluji, left on the wall of the factory a declaration of responsibility in the name of Hamas, stating that the action was meant to commemorate the 2nd anniversary of the birth of the movement. They succeeded in escaping and went into hiding, thus becoming the first fugitives. They were soon to be joined by hundreds of Palestinian young men wanted by the Israelis for a variety of terrorism charges, ranging from stone to murder. On December 4th, 1990, the day of the stabbing in Jaffa, the Israelis launched a massive campaign against the remains of Hamas. Throughout the West Bank and Gaza, they arrested no less than 1,700 people suspected of membership or of any kind of affiliation to the movement. Among those arrested were the members of the new leadership put in place by Musa Marzouk during his 1989 visit. The West Bank was harder hit this time than previously because the two attackers in the aluminum factory were believed to have been sheltered by Hamas members there. Despite the extent of the Israeli campaign, Hamas on this occasion took less time to cover. With the overall control of the movement now in the hands of its leaders abroad, little disruption occurred. In addition, the leadership on the outside was boosted by the arrival of four main Hamas figures from the inside. After a brief period of detention, four of these leaders were deported to Lebanon. They soon assumed senior positions of responsibility within Hamas's institutions abroad. Meanwhile, Sheikh Yassin faced trial in an Israeli military court. After a series of hearings that began in early 1990, he was eventually sentenced on October 16, 1991, to one life term plus 15 years. The court decided he was guilty of all charges in the indictment submitted by the military prosecutor. He maintained his innocence of the kidnappings and killings of the two Israeli soldiers, but took responsibility for founding Hamas. 2 weeks later, Mohammed al-Sharatia, who was then age 34, was sentenced to 3 life terms plus 30 years for his role in kidnapping and killing the two soldiers. One of the unforeseen outcomes of the Israeli onslaught on Hamas was the swelling of the ranks of the fugitives, who were obliged to flee the country if they could, or if they could not, to go underground for as long as they were able. Those who were in hiding usually felt that since they had already lost their freedom, they had nothing more to lose. Their general practice was to form small groups to mount attacks on Israeli targets or to improvise whatever attacks they could on an individual basis. It was out of this phenomenon that Hamas's military wing, Katab al-Shahid Izzuddin al-Qassam brigades were born. The brigades were not an extension of al-Mujahideen, but an entirely new creation set up and led by a much younger generation of Hamas activists whose motive was to take revenge for Israel's ruthless repression of Hamas. And then it just continues. Now, the main reason that I wanted to share this was that because, or despite all of the repression and the oppression that the Hamas organization and the Palestinians face because of the Israelis, or are subjected to because of the Israelis, they still resist. They still find a way to resist. So despite however oppressed people are around the world, there's still a way to get back at the oppressor. So this book, I really highly recommend people to read it. And if you don't want to buy it, you can find it online for free, because it's a great read. And it gives some very unique, enlightening insight into the Palestinian struggle for independence and the organization that we all know as Hamas. So I really didn't have anything else to discuss in the show, but I did want to get this information out. And like I said, I'm going to have these links available on my YouTube channel. So anybody who wants to take a look at this book and read through it before they buy it, you'll be able to do that. So be sure to visit my website, which is suncoastnews.net. That's suncoastnews.net. And with that, I'm going to conclude the show and wish everyone the very best. And thanks for listening. Take care.